Hey everyone, welcome back to 996 The Howl. Still an uncharacteristically quiet summer for the Coyotes considering, we had the Exodus last season, a lot of monumental trades a years before, big drafts. This year we had a good draft day, sort of a mid free agency day, but it's been quiet since, which might be good because I'll be on vacation for the next 2 weeks. So if some Coyotes news comes up in the next 2 weeks, I doubt I'll be able to comment it. The next video will be September 1st, September 2nd, just to recap if any news happens. And I expect the only news to be Barrett Hayton signing because he's still the only restricted free agent left on the Coyotes to sign. He did not agree with the qualifying offer the Coyotes offered him, as reported by Craig Morgan. And he's not arbitration eligible. I just learned that recently. He needs one more pro year to get an arbitration, clause in his contract and able to negotiate with an arbitrator. So he's pretty much at the hands of the Coyotes. It's disappointing that they haven't agreed on something yet. But it seems like the Coyotes fan base is not too concerned. Maybe I'm overemphasizing this signing, but I feel like this is an important contract for Hayton. It should be a bridge, and 100% it's going to be a bridge deal. Maybe sort of like what Kakko signed. Kakko signed a $2.1 million deal by 2 years. Kakko's been underwhelming. He was a second overall draft pick by the New York Rangers. Hasn't really put it together. Hasn't scored more than 10 goals in a season. Hayton's upped him there, but Kakko's had some seasons just like Hayton's recent season, whereas Hayton's basically only had one season. The other 2 seasons were a bit of a wash. It could be a mix of, a bad coaching system, a bad team overall, and just the fact that Hayton hasn't played a lot of hockey in the past 3 years due to COVID and all this, and playing with the Coyotes, being on the taxi squad. The American Hockey League, was hit by COVID as well. So it's a bit of a mixed bag as to why Hayton has struggled to really hit his stride. But I feel like under Andre Tourigny, the new head coach for the Coyotes, the last 30 games or so, he really turned it on. When Keller went down with an injury, he was pretty much the only go-to guy. And he did a pretty nice job. He covered for Keller on the PK, gained almost a minute and a half of shorthanded ice time per game. So he's getting there slowly but surely. But he's a 5th overall draft pick. You really want those high draft picks to make an impact, quickly and make a big impact quickly. And Hayton unfortunately hasn't done that. You can see his future, the highest to be a second line center. Right now, he's a really good third line center. With the Coyotes' injuries and just a bad team overall, he is a second line center, but I think on other teams he would be a third line centerman. He's also a centerman. Kakko is not a centerman, he's a winger, which is why maybe Hayton wants more money. Hayton's relied upon more than Kakko. Hayton gets more ice time, more shorthanded minutes. He's a centerman, so he's taking important face-offs. So maybe, Hayton wants that $2 million mark, but I think the Coyotes want, they could go either way. The Coyotes are for sure want Hayton signed 3 years or longer because they want him cheap. And in the case of if he explodes, which there's a high probability Hayton has a really good season next year, which will up his value. I'm sure the Coyotes want 3 years minimum, whereas Hayton's camp probably wants that 2-year bridge, that 2-year prove-it deal where he explodes the next 2 seasons and then, he demands and commands a lot more money. But let's get into some of the stats. Only 20 games played in his rookie year, I guess. 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points. 11 minutes of ice time. You're looking at a third line, fourth line minutes right there. And then COVID happens. He's on the taxi squad, I think, for the playoffs. Maybe plays 3 games. And then in 2021, the 56 game shortened season, he only plays 14 games, gets sent down to Tucson, but he plays 26 games in Tucson. Also before the 2021 season started, he played 8 games in the Finnish League on the same line with Michelli, but only put up 1 assist. That's a bit bizarre. You really don't see that. Just COVID created a lot of interesting and unique situations, and Hayton only played in the 1920 season. He did only play 20 games for the Coyotes, but only 5 games for Tucson and 7 games for the World Junior Championship. So he played 32 games in the 2019-2020 season, really low. For 2021, 14 games with the Coyotes, 26 with Tucson. So that goes up to 40 games, and then 8 games in Finland. So we only played 48 games in 2021. And then this past season, he only played 60 games. Unfortunately, he got injured, and he only played 4 games with the Tucson Roadrunners. So his bulk of games in calendar years has been really low compared to other players. If he was really good and had a permanent spot in the Coyotes roster, his gameplay numbers would jump up just like his other draft mates in his draft class. But thankfully, in the 60 games, he decided to start becoming an NHL player, a consistent NHL player, not really getting scratched. He got sent down and then got injured really quickly. But once his injury healed up, he lost some muscle weight to be faster. And the coaching staff gave him some more responsibilities on the PK, dropped him down from, I think, first line center to second or third line center, so his matchups are more favorable. And he gets 10 goals, 14 assists, 24 points with 16 minutes per game. A huge jump. That's second line, borderline first line minutes right there. That's what you like to see from Hayton. I really liked how the coaching staff put trust into Hayton and put him in situations that Rick Tocchet wouldn't have put him in. So it's a nice breath of fresh air over there. But his face-off percentage, you might think it's dropping from 50%, but his first season he only had 61 face-offs, and then the 50% face-off percentage was only 80 face-offs, and then here he had over 800 face-offs. So that's a good metric, 48%, not too bad for pretty much his first concrete season in the NHL where he was a regular NHL player. 48% on 800 face-offs. I expect that number to increase, and hopefully it increases. If he could become over a 50% face-off guy, he'd be really reliable, and he'd be out in other situations, maybe last minute of the period, maybe more power play minutes, power play number 1 to win that draw back and maintain possession. That could be really important. Like I said, Rick Tocchet didn't trust him killing penalties, but under the new coaching staff, gets almost a minute and a half per game on the penalty kill. Points per 60, thankfully, because his ice time jumped almost 5 minutes per game, so did his points per 60. If you saw that points per 60, I mentioned this before in Keller and Schmaltz's video, but if he maintained like a 1.1 or less and his ice time increased, that means he's not really doing much with the increased ice time. But it's a good signal that he gets increased ice time and his points per 60 increases as well, almost by 50%. So it's good that he's getting 1.5 points per 60 minutes of ice time. It's better that he's getting more points per time on the ice. And then O-zone and D-zone, Rick Tocchet would only throw him out there in favorable offensive positions in terms of their face-offs. And then Andre Tourigny, because he plays a lot of shorthanded minutes, obviously his D-zone percentage is going to be higher. And the Coyotes as a team overall, they don't really maintain possession and get a good amount of good looks on the opposition, so the goalie isn't freezing the puck. The Coyotes don't have sustained pressure in the O-zone just as a team in general, so that's why also his O-zone percentage is lower. Usually when you see a player with high O-zone, they're really good offensive-minded players who take a lot of shots, make the goalies make a save, and that's why face-off are in the offensive zone. And they don't kill penalties, so almost like 90% of face-offs on the penalty kill are in your defensive zone. So that's why it's skewed a bit more to the D-zone percentage. But other than that, it's sad to see and unfortunate to see that out of his draft class, Hayton's pretty much one of 2 or 3 guys who's really struggling out of the gate. I would think him and Zadina are struggling a lot. Out of the top 12, it's like Hayton and Zadina that are struggling, and also the New York Rangers drafted Kraftsov, who requested a trade. He's only played 20 NHL games. That's another draft pick that kind of went out the window for the Rangers, just like Elias Anderson, who they got from the Coyotes in that Stepan and Ranta trade. Just another high draft pick by the Rangers who doesn't like the Rangers, doesn't really report to them, and requests and demands a trade. It was a bad time for the Coyotes that they needed a centerman. That's the only reason why they drafted Hayton. The top 3 centermen for that draft were KK Kotkaniemi, who Montreal drafted, and then Carolina Hurricanes offer sheeted. Barrett Hayton was the top 2 centerman in that draft, and then number 3 is Dellandrea, who I'm sure most of you don't know who that is, plays for the Dallas Stars. So the center for that draft, centermen in general, were really weak. The Coyotes always needed a number 1 centerman, just like why they drafted Logan Cooley at 3rd overall this draft. So Coyotes have always looked for that number 1 centerman. Unfortunately, they had a lot of players that were really good drafted after Hayton, but they're defensemen. You got Quinn Hughes, Boquist, Bouchard, and Dobson. They're all playing a lot of NHL games, a lot of important minutes. They're making huge impacts for their teams, and they're only getting better as time goes on. So I know it made no sense for the Coyotes to draft one of those guys. They had Chychrun, they had OEL. They didn't need a defenseman. I think they had Soderstrom. Maybe it was the year after they drafted Hayton, they got Soderstrom. But they also had Pierre-Olivier Joseph in the system. So they needed a centerman. It made no sense to not draft a centerman. You know, a good Canadian centerman was Barrett Hayton, just like Shane Wright. Just, you know, a safe centerman pick. Everyone touted him to be the next Bergeron. I feel like Bergeron gets thrown around way too much in terms of high draft picks that are Canadian centermen. But it hasn't been working out lately with Hayton, but hopefully with this next season, he signs a good contract, gets a good workout in the summer, comes back, he's solidified and given that second line center spot. He had good chemistry with Nick Ritchie and Lawson Krause. Krause just signed a new contract, so he's got some jump in his game too. So hopefully Hayton picks up where he left off in the last 30-ish games for the Coyotes and really becomes that player that the Coyotes hoped in when they drafted him. I don't think he'll ever be a number 1 centerman, but if he could notch 15, 20 goals consistently, that's good supplementary and depth for the Coyotes in terms of centerman. You know, he's a stopgap until Cooley comes over, a stopgap when Geekie comes over, and with their draft pick in 2023, hopefully it's a really high draft pick. They draft another great centerman, and he gets there in the top 2 center positions. And then Hayton, we really don't need Hayton anymore and don't need to rely on him to make a big jump. But right now, you know, he's our guy. He's our youngest and most promising centerman that hasn't really got it going. There's some promise with the most recent season, but you just got to turn it on and make that next big step. You know, him and Victor Soderstrom, they need to make big steps next season. No one really talks about Soderstrom, but I assume he'll be sent down to Tucson considering how many defensemen the Coyotes grab in free agency. But Soderstrom's got to have a huge season with the Roadrunners, lead them somewhere, you know, back to the playoffs, lead them in power play points, lead them in defensemen on ice time, and just be a force out there, be that offensive defenseman that we need Soderstrom to be. Maybe if he progresses really well, Soderstrom, it makes it easier to swallow the Chychrun trade, as we really don't have much, you know, high touted defenseman after Chychrun in the system. So that's it for me. Hopefully we come back in September. You know, they had that rookie tournament in mid-September in San Jose with, you know, Arizona, San Jose, Anaheim, Vegas, and LA. They had that rookie tournament. That's mid-September. Training camp's mid-September. Then you got preseason at the end of September. So things are going to kick off really quickly at the start of September, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully Hayton signs a good contract for both sides. He feels good about it, comes back next season, and maybe he pushes for that number 1 centerman spot. You know, Travis Boyd has it right now alongside Keller and Schmaltz. That's very easy to take it away from Boyd We don't expect much from Boyd. He had great chemistry with Keller and Schmaltz. That's why he's our number one centerman. He produced consistently and had a career year. So if Hayton could make a jump early in the season, he could easily take that number one centerman spot. The coaching staff likes him as opposed to the previous coaching staff. So hopefully it all works out for Barrett Hayton. So that's it for me. Thank you for watching. If you'd like me to see, spread the word. And as always, thank you for your support.